The scent of prey lingered in the cold morning air. Cain Shadowcrest inhaled deeply as he crouched beside the ancient pine, his weathered fingers tracing the unnatural markings carved into its bark. 200 years of tracking had honed his senses beyond those of ordinary wolves. What others might dismiss as random scratches, he recognized as a hunter's signal. Not the mark of animal hunters seeking game, but something far more sinister: hunters of his kind. Moonlight spilled through the canopy overhead, illuminating his face with silver light. The years had etched deep lines around his eyes and mouth, testament to centuries of vigilance. Yet his body remained powerful, coiled with the strength and agility that had earned him his position as the Alpha King's enforcer. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, fell past his shoulders, unbound in the solitude of the forest. Cain pressed his palm against the marking, eyes closing as memories flooded his consciousness. 15 years ago, similar markings had appeared on the northern borders. He had recognized the warning signs then, but arrived too late. The Frost Moon Pack, keepers of the oldest magic among wolfkind, had been massacred. Men, women, children, bodies strewn across blood-soaked snow, their unique silver-blonde hair stained crimson. His jaw tightened at the memory of a small footprint in the snow, leading away from the carnage. A child's print, quickly covered by fresh snowfall. Despite weeks of searching, they never found the survivor. Another failure to haunt his nights. "The past never stays buried," he murmured to the silent forest. Rising to his full, imposing height, Cain collected samples of the strange residue beside the marking. An unnatural scent, chemical and sharp, burned his sensitive nostrils. The hunters were becoming more sophisticated in their methods, using mixtures to mask their own scents. But they could never fully hide from him. The journey back to the Alpha King's temporary residence took less than an hour at his pace. As Cain approached the grand stone structure commandeered for the royal visit, guards straightened their postures. No one challenged him. His reputation preceded him like a shadow. King Alaric stood at the window of his private chamber, staring out at the mountains beyond. Though they had been close companions for over a century, Cain still observed the formality of kneeling in the royal presence. "Rise, old friend," Alaric said without turning. "What news from the forest?" Cain approached, offering the collected evidence in a small leather pouch. "Hunter's markings, Your Majesty. Recent, within the last 48 hours. Alaric turned, the weight of kingship evident in his bearing. Though his physical appearance suggested a human in his 50s, his eyes held the wisdom of centuries. The crown he wore indoors was smaller than his ceremonial one, but no less significant, a circle of ancient silver set with amber that glowed with internal fire in certain lights. "You are certain?" Alaric asked, taking the pouch. "Unmistakable. The same patterns as before. They're monitoring pack movements, establishing a perimeter." Cain's voice remained steady, though rage simmered beneath his calm exterior. "They're hunting again." Alaric inhaled the contents of the pouch, his expression darkening. "I was told their organization was destroyed, that you had personally seen to it." "I eliminated those I found," Cain replied, the memory of blood on his hands as vivid as yesterday. "But like any poison, some always remains hidden beneath the surface." The king moved to a heavy oak table covered with maps. "This complicates matters. We cannot postpone the ceremonies for Noah. His nightmares worsen with each passing moon." Cain studied his king's face, noting the lines of worry that hadn't been there weeks before. "The prince's condition deteriorates?" "He wakes, screaming her name," Alaric said softly. 3 years since her passing, yet his grief remains raw. Our physicians say there is nothing physically wrong with him, but—" He trailed off, pain flickering across his features. "The wounds of the spirit often prove more stubborn than those of the flesh," Cain offered. Alaric nodded. "Which is why we are here. The ancient rituals may be his only hope." The king's finger traced a location on the map. "And why I must ask more of you, my friend. Speak it. I need someone versed in the old ways, not just any healer, but one who understands the deeper magics. the type of healer the Frost Moon Pack once produced. Alaric's eyes met Kane's. Find me such a person among this territory's pack, someone who can access the old knowledge, who might connect with Noah in ways our court physicians cannot. Kane remained silent, weighing his response carefully. Such gifts are rare, Your Majesty. The Frost Moon Pack was unique in their abilities. Yet their knowledge must exist somewhere, Alaric insisted. In someone. My queen believed the old magics never truly die. They simply wait, dormant, for the right vessel. His voice softened at the mention of his late mate. She was researching this before her illness. I will search, Kane promised, though doubt shadowed his commitment. But we must also address the hunter threat. Their presence here, now, cannot be coincidence. Agreed. Alaric straightened, kingship settling over him like armor. Double the royal guard. Restrict Noah's movements to secure areas only. And Kane, he paused, find me that healer. My son's future depends on it. Kane bowed, accepting the weight of both commands. As he turned to leave, Alaric spoke once more. And old friend? If these are the same hunters responsible for the Frost Moon massacre, I want them alive. I have questions that only blood will answer. The darkness in the king's voice matched the promise in Kane's heart. As you command. The bitter aroma of yarrow and sage filled the small workroom as Lyra Frost carefully measured dried herbs into a mortar. Her pale fingers, stained green from a morning harvesting medicines, worked with practiced precision. At 21, she had already earned respect among the pack for her healing abilities, though she remained officially an apprentice to Alara, the pack's elderly herbalist. More wormwood, Alara instructed from her seat by the window, her voice creaking like old leather. The winter was harsh. The joint pain will be severe. Lyra added the requested herb, crushing the mixture with smooth, even strokes. Sunlight streaming through the small window caught in her unusual silver blonde hair, creating an ethereal halo around her face. She'd pulled it back in a simple braid, but errant strands always escaped, as though unwilling to be contained. Finished, Lyra announced, decanting the mixture into small cloth pouches. This should be enough for the entire hunting party. Alara nodded approvingly, her ancient eyes bright in her wizened face. Your touch with the healing herbs improves. They respond to you in ways I've rarely seen. Lyra lowered her gaze, uncomfortable with praise. I follow your instructions carefully. It's more than that. Alara rose slowly, joints protesting the movement. The plants yield their essence more readily for you, as though they recognize something in your spirit. A knock at the door saved Lyra from responding. An old man stood in the doorway, his weather-beaten face contorted with pain, blood seeping through a makeshift bandage on his arm. Master Thorn, Lyra greeted him, immediately guiding him to a chair. What happened? Foolishness, the old hunter grumbled. Teaching the youngsters proper skinning techniques. Knife slipped. He winced as Lyra gently unwrapped the soiled bandage. Figured you'd do a cleaner job patching me up than those butchers they call physicians. The wound was deep, slicing across his forearm in an angry red line. Lyra assessed it with a practiced eye. This needs stitching. While Alara prepared the necessary implements, Lyra cleaned the wound with a solution of distilled alcohol and witch hazel. The old hunter hissed between clenched teeth. Sorry, Lyra murmured. Almost done. As she worked, a strange warmth spread from her fingertips into the damaged tissue. She'd felt this sensation before, a connection that formed between her and those she healed, as though her own life force reached out to mend what was broken. She'd learned early to conceal this ability, sensing it marked her as different in a world where difference could be dangerous. You've done this before, the hunter observed, watching her efficient movements. Many times, Lyra replied, threading a needle with catgut. No, Thorn said, his pale blue eyes suddenly sharp. I mean the other thing. What you're doing beneath the surface. Lyra's hands stilled momentarily, her heart skipping a beat. I don't understand. The old man's lips curved in a knowing smile. I'm old, girl, not blind. I've been around long enough to recognize old magic when I feel it. He glanced at Alara, who had tactfully moved across the room. "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me." "There's no secret," Lyra insisted, beginning to stitch the wound with tiny, precise sutures. "Just proper medical technique." Thorn chuckled, then winced as the needle pierced his skin. "If you say so, but I know what I feel. Reminds me of a healer I met once, far north of here, years ago." His eyes took on a distant look. "She had hair like yours. Unusual color." Lyra focused intently on her stitching, unwilling to meet his gaze. The pendant beneath her simple linen shirt seemed suddenly heavier, a silver weight against her skin. Her grandmother's last gift, pressed into her small hands 15 years ago with urgent instructions never to remove it. "There," she said, tying off the final stitch. "Keep it clean. Change the dressing daily. Return in a week to have the stitches removed." As she wrapped a clean bandage around his arm, Thorn spoke again, his voice lower. "They came through here once, you know. The hunters." The word sent a chill through Lyra's body. Hunters. In her nightmares, they wore shadows for faces and carried silver blades that gleamed in firelight. "What hunters?" she asked, forcing casualness into her tone. "The ones who hunt our kind," Thorn replied. "Not for sport or pelts, but extinction. Fanatics who believe we're abominations." His eyes held hers. "They have a special hatred for those with gifts like yours." "Master Thorn," Alara interrupted, returning with a small vial. "Take this for the pain. 3 drops in water, morning and night." Her tone brooked no argument, effectively ending the conversation. The old hunter accepted the vial with a nod. "My thanks for your care, young Lyra." As he rose to leave, he added quietly, "Remember, even the brightest flame must sometimes hide its light, especially when hunters prowl the darkness." After he departed, Alara closed the door firmly. "What did he say to you?" "Nothing of consequence," Lyra lied, busying herself with cleaning the work area. Alara watched her with knowing eyes. "Be careful, child. Thorn is a good man, but he has seen much in his long life. Perhaps too much. His tongue loosens with age." That night, alone in her small room adjoining the healer's cottage, Lyra removed the silver pendant from beneath her clothing. In the candlelight, the intricate design seemed to shift and flow, a crescent moon cradling a small star, surrounded by delicate, frost-like patterns. She traced the familiar shape with her fingertip, a ritual performed countless times since childhood. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," her grandmother had whispered, clasping the necklace around her tiny neck. "It's acting despite it. Remember who you are, little one. Last of the frost moon, last of our line." The memory fractured into more chaotic images, screams in the night, the scent of blood on snow, her grandmother pushing her into a hidden cellar beneath the healing hut. "Not a sound, no matter what you hear. Promise me, Lyra." She had promised, had lain silent while death claimed her entire pack above, had remained hidden for days afterward, emerging only when hunger overcame fear, had wandered, orphaned and alone, until a kindly merchant found her on the road and delivered her to a human settlement. Eventually, her emerging abilities had drawn her back to her own kind, to Alara, who asked few questions about her past and taught her to channel her gifts through traditional herbalism, to safety in anonymity. Lyra tucked the pendant back beneath her nightgown. Tomorrow, the Alpha King's entourage would arrive for their formal visit. The pack was abuzz with speculation about the royal presence in their modest territory. Such visits were rare, typically signaling major political alliances or warnings of trouble. She would keep her head down, as always, would blend into the background of servants and lesser pack members, would remain invisible. Survival depended on it. The village marketplace bustled with unusual activity. News of the royal family's arrival had brought people from outlying areas, eager to glimpse the Alpha King and his entourage. Lyra wove through the crowded streets, a basket of fresh herbs balanced on her hip. Alara had sent her to gather specific plants that grew only near the village stream, claiming they were essential for tonics the Alpha might require. Children darted between stalls, playing elaborate games of chase. The scent of fresh bread and roasting meat filled the air, mingling with the earthy aroma of livestock and the cloying sweetness of honey wine being sold by the cupful. Merchants called their wares, voices competing with the general din of commerce and conversation. Amid the chaos, Lyra noticed a small boy standing alone near a fabric merchant's stall. Something about him commanded her attention, perhaps the quality of his clothing, too fine for a village child, or his posture, straight-backed and dignified despite his youth. 7 or 8 years old, she guessed, with dark hair and solemn eyes that seemed to absorb every detail of the market. A woman hovered nearby, clearly watching over him while attempting to appear casual in her observation. A nursemaid or guardian, not his mother. The difference in their sense made that clear to Lyra's sensitive nose. As she passed, the boy looked directly at her. Their eyes met briefly, and Lyra felt an unexpected jolt of recognition, though she was certain they had never met. His gaze lingered on her unusual hair before moving to the pendant that had slipped from beneath her collar. Something like wonder crossed his face. Lyra tucked the pendant away and hurried past, uncomfortable with the attention. Children were often drawn to her, a common trait among healers, Alara claimed, but this felt different, more significant somehow. She completed her errand quickly, filling her basket with the requested herbs and adding a few extras she knew would be useful for common ailments. As she started back toward the pack house, a commotion erupted near the center of the marketplace. Voices raised in alarm, people rushing toward some disturbance. Instinct told her to avoid the crowd, to slip away unnoticed. But the scent that reached her on the wind overrode caution. Smoke. Not the controlled smoke of cooking fires, but the wild, hungry scent of a building ablaze. Lyra set down her basket and moved toward the disturbance, threading through the increasingly panicked crowd. The eastern market square had descended into chaos. Flames leapt from the roof of a large shop, orange tongues licking at the thatching and wooden beams. People rushed from the building, coughing and stumbling into the street. "Fire!" voices shouted. "Get water! Form a line!" As villagers organized a bucket brigade from the nearby well, Lyra scanned the scene. Her healer's instinct sought those who might need immediate aid. Several people sat on the ground, overcome by smoke, others nursing minor burns. The nursemaid she had noticed earlier was screaming, struggling against 2 men who restrained her. "The prince!" she shrieked. "He's still inside! Let me go!" The prince. The words struck Lyra like physical blows. The boy she had seen, not just any child, but the Alpha King's heir. Guards in royal colors had appeared, their faces tight with tension as they assessed the rapidly deteriorating building. "Too dangerous!" one shouted over the roar of the flames. "The roof is about to collapse!" In that moment, Lyra noticed something that froze her blood. Amid the natural chaos of the fire, unnatural patterns formed in the flames. Shapes too precise, too deliberate to be coincidence. Ancient symbols she had seen only in her grandmother's most secret texts. Magic meant to trap, to contain. This was no accident. And through the haze of smoke, she heard it. A child's frightened cry from within the burning building. Time seemed to slow around her. The shouting crowd, the desperate guards, the wailing nursemaid, all faded to background noise. Lyra moved without conscious decision, slipping past the distracted guards toward the building's entrance. "Stop her!" someone shouted, but too late. Lyra plunged into the smoke-filled interior, the heat immediately assaulting her exposed skin. She pulled her scarf up over her mouth and nose, eyes watering as she tried to orient herself. The shop appeared to be a bookseller's, shelves of bound volumes, providing perfect fuel for the hungry flames. "Prince!" she called out. "Where are you?" A small sob answered from the rear of the shop. Lyra moved toward it, ducking beneath a burning beam. The magical symbols she had glimpsed from outside were clearer in here, shimmering with unnatural light among the natural flames. Whoever had set this fire had meant to ensure no one escaped. She found the boy huddled beneath a heavy wooden table, clutching a small wooden toy to his chest. His eyes widened at her approach. "I'm here to help," Lyra said, extending her hand. "We need to leave quickly." The prince shook his head, terror evident in every line of his small body. "I can't. The fire speaks. It wants to eat me." Lyra glanced at the nearest symbol, understanding dawning. The magic was specifically targeted, meant to contain someone of royal blood. Without hesitation, she reached for the pendant at her throat, grasping it firmly. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. "Our magic flows in the blood, child. The pendant is merely a focus." Concentrating, Lyra channeled her energy through the ancient silver, feeling it grow warm in her palm. A counterspell, simple but effective, formed in her mind, words her grandmother had taught her as a child, disguised as nursery rhymes. "Frost of moon, light of stars, shield this child from flame and harm," she chanted softly. A cool blue light emanated from the pendant, pushing back against the malevolent symbols. The prince's eyes widened further. "You're making magic." "Yes," Lyra acknowledged, reaching for him again. "And now we can leave. Trust me." This time he took her hand. Lyra lifted him into her arms, surprised at how light he felt. "Close your eyes and hold tight to me," she instructed. "Don't look at the fire." He buried his face against her shoulder as she turned back toward the entrance. The protective magic from her pendant created a small bubble of cooler air around them, but it wouldn't last long. Her strength was already waning, the effort of maintaining the counterspell draining her reserves. The path back seemed longer, the flames higher. A burning beam crashed down just ahead, blocking their route. Lyra hesitated, seeking another way out. "There's a side door," the prince mumbled against her shoulder, "behind the counter." Lyra changed direction, moving toward the shop counter. The side exit was partially blocked by fallen shelving, but offered enough space for them to squeeze through. As she maneuvered the prince through the narrow opening, a section of burning ceiling collapsed. Pain seared along her forearm as a flaming timber grazed her skin. Lyra bit back a scream, unwilling to frighten the child further. She pushed him through the doorway to safety, then followed, stumbling into the relative coolness of a side alley. People rushed toward them as they emerged. The nursemaid broke free of her restrainers, running to gather the prince into her arms, sobbing with relief. Guards surrounded them immediately, creating a protective barrier. In the confusion, Lyra slipped away, cradling her burned arm against her chest. The magical exertion combined with the physical injury left her lightheaded and nauseated. She needed to treat the burn quickly before infection set in. More importantly, she needed to disappear before anyone thought to question her too closely about what had happened inside that shop. Questions she wasn't prepared to answer. About magic that shouldn't exist. About symbols that shouldn't be known to anyone outside her lost pack. As she hurried away, she failed to notice the tall, dark figure watching from the shadows, failed to see his nostrils flare as he caught her scent on the wind, failed to observe the recognition and shock that briefly transformed his stoic features. Cain's Shadowcrest had found what his king sought, but the discovery raised more questions than it answered. The great hall of the pack house had been transformed for the royal visit. Tapestries depicting ancient battles and legendary pack leaders adorned walls typically left bare. Long tables arranged in a horseshoe formation filled the space, with a raised dais at the head where the Alpha's family would sit alongside the royal guests. Servants rushed about, polishing silver and arranging elaborate floral displays that filled the air with competing fragrances. Lyra worked methodically in a small antechamber adjacent to the hall, preparing healing sachets under Alara's direction. The older woman fussed over the arrangements, constantly checking that the herbs were properly proportioned for maximum effectiveness. "The Alpha King's personal physician is very particular," Alara explained for the third time. "These must be perfect. Our pack's reputation depends on it." Lyra nodded absently, her attention divided between her work and the throbbing pain in her bandaged arm. She had treated the burn herself, applying a soothing paste of aloe and silver leaf before wrapping it in clean linen. The long sleeves of her work dress concealed the injury, but every movement sent fresh waves of pain radiating up to her shoulder. "You're distracted today," Alara observed, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. "Is something troubling you?" "Just tired," Lyra replied, avoiding direct eye contact. "I didn't sleep well." Alara seemed about to press further when a commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. The massive wooden doors swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "They're early," Alara whispered, her fingers tightening around a bundle of dried lavender. Guards in royal colors entered first, their expressions alert as they scanned the hall for potential threats. Behind them came a procession of nobles and officials, each dressed more elaborately than the last. And then, walking with the fluid grace of a natural predator, entered a man whose reputation preceded him like a deadly shadow. Cain Shadowcrest, commander of the Royal Guard, enforcer of the Alpha King's will. The Demon Wolf, as he was known in whispered stories, ruthless, unforgiving, loyal only to his king. Lyra had heard tales of his exploits since childhood, how he had single-handedly tracked a traitor across 3 territories, following a scent trail gone cold for months, how he had faced down an entire rival pack to retrieve a stolen artifact, how he had killed more challengers to the crown than any enforcer before him. The reality of him exceeded even those stories. Tall and powerfully built, he moved with the controlled economy of a seasoned warrior. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was pulled back from a face that might have been carved from granite, all sharp angles and unyielding planes. But it was his eyes that commanded attention. Dark and penetrating, they missed nothing as they swept the hall, cataloging every person, every exit, every potential threat. And then, inexplicably, his gaze locked with Lyra's. Her breath caught. Something in his expression shifted. A narrowing of focus, a spark of recognition. Impossible. They had never met. Yet he stared at her with the intensity of a predator sighting prey after a long hunt. Eden, the wormwood. Alara nudged her, breaking the spell. Lyra fumbled with the herbs, aware that her hands were trembling. The burn beneath her sleeve seemed to flare in response to her agitation. She needed to calm down, to remember her place, to be invisible. But as she worked alongside Alara, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every few minutes, she would glance up to find Cain's gaze on her, calculating, assessing. What did he see? What could he possibly want with someone like me? The answer came sooner than expected. You. His voice cut through the general din of the hall, silencing those nearby. It took Lyra several heartbeats to realize he was addressing her. Herbalist. Come. Not a request. A command. Alara gave her a worried glance, but nodded slightly. One didn't refuse the king's enforcer. Lyra followed him out of the great hall, aware of curious stares burning into her back. The corridor beyond was mercifully empty, but her relief was short-lived. Cain stopped abruptly, turning to face her with such suddenness that she nearly collided with his chest. "Your arm," he said, his voice surprisingly soft despite its depth. "Show me." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "My arm, sir?" His expression remained impassive, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "The burn. Show me now." Panic fluttered in her chest. How did he know? No one had seen her injury. She had been careful, so careful. With trembling fingers, she rolled up her sleeve, revealing the hastily applied bandage beneath. The gauze was spotted with herbal paste and traces of blood where the burn had seeped. Cain's nostrils flared slightly, scenting the wound. Then his hand closed around her wrist, his touch unexpectedly gentle as he examined the bandage. "You were in the village yesterday," he stated, "the fire at the eastern quarter." It wasn't a question. Lyra didn't answer, couldn't answer past the knot of fear in her throat. "The child you pulled from the burning building," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. "Do you know who he was?" She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper when she finally found it. "No, just a boy who needed help." Something unreadable passed across Cain's face, a shadow of emotion quickly concealed. "That boy is Prince Noah, the Alpha King's heir and only child." The revelation hit like a physical blow, the small boy with terrified eyes clutching a wooden toy as flames licked at the ceiling of the village shop. the desperate nursemaid screaming outside, restrained by guards who deemed the building too dangerous to enter, her instinctive dash inside while everyone argued about protocol. I didn't know," she stammered, her mind racing. "There was so much confusion. I just heard a child crying and you ran into a burning building," Kane finished without hesitation, "without concern for your own safety." His grip on her wrist tightened marginally. "Why did you hide this?" The question caught her off guard. Why had she hidden it? The truth spilled out before she could filter it. "I'm nobody. It wasn't my place to interfere with royal matters. I thought I'd be punished for overstepping." A humorless smile touched his lips. Punished for saving the future king. He released her wrist, and she immediately clutched it to her chest, the throbbing pain momentarily forgotten in her anxiety. The Alpha King doesn't yet know who saved his son. The nursemaid was too distraught to notice who carried Noah out, and the guards were focused on containing the crowd. His voice hardened. "But he wants to know. He demands to know." "Please," Lyra whispered. "I'd rather not—" "This isn't optional," Kane cut in. "The king will reward you. It's a matter of honor." Honor. Such a dangerous word among wolves. She'd seen how honor played out in pack politics, how quickly it transformed into obligation, into ownership. "I need to prepare for the welcoming feast," she said, attempting to retreat. "Elara will worry." Kane moved with preternatural speed, blocking her path. This close, she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the heat radiating from his powerful frame. He wasn't just physically imposing. There was something else about him, an intensity that seemed to bend the air around him. "The feast has been postponed," he informed her. "The king wishes to rest after the journey and spend time with his son. Tomorrow night, you will be presented to him." It wasn't a request. "Why wait until tomorrow?" she dared to ask. Kane studied her for a long moment. "The prince is affected by yesterday's events. The king wishes to ensure he is settled before court proceedings begin." His gaze flickered to her concealed burn. "And you should have that properly treated. The pack physician will see to it." "No, thank you," she said instinctively. "I have my own remedies." Something like approval flashed in his eyes. "As you wish, but know this. From this moment you are under my protection. No one will harm you." The declaration shocked her into silence. Protection from the king's enforcer. It was both a blessing and a curse. Protection meant visibility. Visibility meant vulnerability. As if reading her thoughts, Kane added, "Your life is about to change, little healer. The king doesn't forget debts, and you have placed him in your debt." Before she could respond, a young warrior appeared at the end of the corridor, his posture stiffening when he saw Kane. "Sir, the king requests your presence." Kane nodded once, then turned back to her. "Remember, not a word. I'll come for you tomorrow." With that, he strode away, leaving Lyra trembling against the cold stone wall. Her fingers found her grandmother's pendant, clutching it like a lifeline. Her simple existence, her carefully cultivated invisibility had shattered in the space of a few minutes. That night, sleep eluded Lyra. Her small room in the herbalist's quarters felt both too confined and too exposed. Every shadow seemed to hold watching eyes. Every creak of the old building made her flinch. When dawn finally broke, she'd made her decision. She would tell the truth when presented to the king. She would accept whatever token reward he offered, and then she would request transfer to one of the outlying pack settlements where she could disappear once more. She dressed with care in her finest clothes, a simple blue dress that brought out the unusual silver in her eyes, her hair neatly braided with a few fresh flowers woven through the plaits. The burn on her arm had improved overnight, her natural healing abilities accelerating the process, though it remained tender to the touch. A soft knock at her door announced Elara. The older woman entered, her face drawn with concern. "The king's enforcer spoke with you yesterday," she said without preamble, "about the village fire." Lyra nodded, unsurprised that news had traveled so quickly. "I didn't know the child was the prince." Elara settled onto the edge of Lyra's bed, her aged joints creaking with the movement. "Child, do you understand what this means? The Alpha King will acknowledge a life debt to you publicly." "A life debt?" The term sent a wave of unease through Lyra. "But I don't want anything from him. I just did what was right." Alara's gaze was sympathetic but firm. "What you want is irrelevant now. A life debt from the Alpha King is both an honor and a burden. He must discharge it to maintain his honor, and you must accept his offering." The concern in her voice stirred Lyra's anxiety. "What aren't you telling me, Alara?" The old herbalist hesitated, her fingers absently stroking the worn fabric of her healer's robe. "There are rumors about why the Alpha King brought his son to our territory in the first place, about why the royal family is truly here." Lyra leaned forward. "What rumors?" "They say the king seeks a healer," Alara said carefully. "Not just any healer, but one versed in the old ways, one who can treat afflictions of the spirit as well as the flesh." "For the prince?" "Yes, the boy has suffered since his mother's death, night terrors, wasting sickness that comes and goes. The court physicians have found no physical cause." Alara's voice dropped lower. "Some whisper that the queen's death was not natural, that she was poisoned." The revelation sent a chill through Lyra. "And now, with this life debt to me." "Now the king must balance his need for a healer with his personal debt," Alara finished. "It complicates matters considerably." Before Lyra could respond, another knock sounded at her door. A young female guard in royal colors stood outside, her expression professional and detached. "The king's enforcer sent me," she said. "You're to come with me now." "Now?" Lyra questioned. "But he said tomorrow night." "Plans have changed," the guard interrupted. "The prince is asking for you." Lyra exchanged a concerned glance with Alara. "The prince is asking for me? How could that be possible?" "No mistake," the guard replied curtly. "The prince described a woman with hair like moonlight who smelled of herbs and flowers. You match the description." Alara squeezed Lyra's hand. "Go. Remember what I told you. Accept whatever the king offers with gratitude. And be careful around the demon wolf," she added in a whisper. "His loyalty is to the crown alone." Lyra followed the guard through the winding corridors of the pack house. Morning sunlight streamed through high windows, illuminating motes of dust in the air and warming the cold stone floors. Pack members they passed stared openly, curiosity and suspicion in their gazes. Being singled out by a royal guard meant either great honor or terrible trouble, and everyone knew she wasn't important enough for honor. Her escort led her to the East Wing, the guest quarters reserved for visiting dignitaries. Two imposing warriors flanked massive double doors carved with the royal crest, a howling wolf beneath a crown of thorns. Lyra's grandmother's pendant seemed to burn against her skin, a phantom warning. The female guard knocked once, and the doors swung open to reveal a sumptuous suite. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting rich tapestries and furniture crafted from rare woods. In the center of this opulent room stood Cain, his back rigid as he conversed in low tones with an older man whose bearing screamed authority. The Alpha King. Even without the circlet resting on his brow, she would have known him by the sheer power that emanated from him like heat from a forge. He was older than she'd expected, with silver threading his dark hair and lines of experience carved into his face. But his eyes, sharp and assessing, held the same intensity she'd seen in Cain's. And seated on a cushioned window seat, clutching the same wooden toy she remembered from the fire, was the young prince. His resemblance to his father was striking, though softened by youth and innocence. When he saw her, his eyes widened with recognition. "It's her!" he exclaimed, sliding from his perch and rushing forward before any adult could stop him. "The Moon Lady who saved me!" He threw his small arms around Lyra's waist, his face pressing against her stomach. The gesture was so unexpected, so guileless, that she froze completely. Royal children didn't embrace common pack members. It simply wasn't done. The king's eyebrows rose fractionally. Cain's expression remained carefully neutral, but she caught a flicker of something, amusement, in his eyes. Gently, She disentangled herself from the prince's grip and dropped into a deep curtsy. "Your Majesty, Your Highness." "Rise," the king commanded, his voice a deep rumble like distant thunder. "My son has been quite insistent about meeting his rescuer." Lyra straightened, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. "I only did what anyone would have done, Your Majesty." "No," the king contradicted flatly. "The guards, my guards, deemed the building too dangerous to enter, yet you, a slip of a woman with no warrior training, ran inside without hesitation." There was a question in his statement, one she wasn't sure how to answer. The truth seemed too simple, too inadequate for the intensity of his scrutiny. "I heard a child crying," she said finally. "There wasn't time to think about danger." The king studied her for a long moment. "What is your name, girl?" "Lyra, Your Majesty. Lyra Frost." Something flickered across his face, too quick to interpret. "Frost," he repeated slowly. "And your position here?" "Apprentice to the pack herbalist, sir. I've been training under Alara for 5 years now." Prince Noah tugged at her sleeve, drawing her attention. "Does your arm hurt? The beam fell on you when you carried me." His innocent question sent a spike of anxiety through her. She hadn't told anyone about the injury except Alara, and she'd given her a vague explanation about an accident with a cooking fire. How had the prince noticed when he'd been barely conscious? "It's nothing, Your Highness," she assured him with a small smile. "Just a scratch." "Show me," the king commanded abruptly. Reluctantly, she rolled up her sleeve, revealing the bandage once more. The king approached, and it took every ounce of willpower not to step back. He radiated dominance in a way that made her instincts scream danger despite his controlled demeanor. He examined the bandage without touching her, his nostrils flaring slightly as he scented the wound beneath. "Our physician will treat this properly." "That's not necessary, Your Majesty," she protested softly. "I've applied—" "It wasn't an offer," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. Then to Cain, "See that it's done today, and prepare the formal announcement for tonight's feast." Cain nodded once. "Yes, my king." The prince was still watching Lyra with open curiosity. "Father says you're to be rewarded," he informed her brightly. "Will you stay in the palace with us now?" The innocent question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Stay in the palace? What kind of reward was the king planning? "Your Highness," she began cautiously, "I have duties here with the pack herbalist. I couldn't possibly—" "We'll discuss the details of your reward privately," the king interjected smoothly. His gaze shifted to his son. "Noah, didn't you have something to give our guest?" The prince's face lit up. "Yes!" He scampered to a side table and returned with a small wooden box. "This is for you. Father had it made special." With trembling fingers, Lyra accepted the box, aware of the weight of the moment, of the eyes watching her every reaction. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a delicate silver bracelet. The craftsmanship was exquisite, tiny wolves chasing each other around the band, their eyes set with what appeared to be tiny diamonds. "It's beautiful," she whispered, genuinely awed by such a lavish gift. "But I can't accept something so valuable." "You can and you will," the king stated. "The bracelet bears our royal crest. It marks you as under our protection." There was that word again. Protection. First from Cain, now from the king himself. But protection always came with a price. "Thank you, Your Majesty," she said, carefully closing the box without removing the bracelet. "You honor me greatly." A ghost of a smile touched the king's lips. "Honor, yes. But this is merely a prelude. My son's life is beyond price, and so my debt to you cannot be discharged with trinkets alone." Before she could respond, the door opened, and a middle-aged man entered, carrying a leather satchel. The royal physician, she presumed. "Ah, Dr. Thorne," the king acknowledged. "Examine this young woman's burn and ensure it's properly treated. We can't have infection setting in." The physician bowed. "Of course, Your Majesty." To Lyra's surprise, the king turned to his son and extended his hand. "Come, Noah. Let's give Miss Frost some privacy." As they moved toward an adjoining chamber, the prince glanced back at Lyra with a smile that tugged unexpectedly at her heart. There was something in his innocent trust that reminded her painfully of another child long ago, a memory she'd worked hard to bury. Once the king and prince had departed, Dr. Thorne gestured to a nearby chair. "Please sit. Let me see this burn." She sat obediently while Kane remained by the door, his posture alert, his gaze fixed somewhere in the middle distance, present but giving the illusion of privacy. The physician carefully unwound her bandage, his expression growing more concerned as the injury was revealed. The burn was angry and red, covering most of her forearm from wrist to elbow. "This is severe," he chided. "You should have sought treatment immediately." "I treated it," she defended quietly. "Cooling herbs, antibacterial paste, fresh bandages." Dr. Thorne hummed non-committally as he examined the wound more closely. "Your treatment wasn't bad, but this requires more specialized care." He opened his satchel and removed several jars and rolls of clean gauze. "This will sting." As he applied a cooling salve to the burn, Lyra bit her lip to keep from wincing. The pain flared hot and sharp before gradually subsiding to a dull throb. "How did it happen exactly?" Dr. Thorne asked as he worked. "The prince mentioned a falling beam." Lyra hesitated, aware of Kane's subtle shift in attention. "Yes, I had to shield the prince when part of the ceiling collapsed. It wasn't a direct hit, just a glancing touch as it fell." The physician's fingers were gentle despite his brusque manner. "You're fortunate. Burns from building fires can be particularly dangerous due to the chemicals released. This should heal well, though you may have some scarring." Scarring was the least of Lyra's concerns. Once the wound was freshly dressed, Dr. Thorne packed his supplies and stood. "Change the bandage twice daily," he instructed. "I'll leave additional supplies with your pack healer." After he departed, Lyra remained seated, suddenly exhausted. The events of the past 24 hours had left her emotionally drained, and the reality of her situation was beginning to sink in. She was now visibly connected to the royal family. Her days of comfortable anonymity were over. "You're afraid?" Kane's voice startled her. She'd almost forgotten his presence. "Wouldn't you be?" she countered, too tired for pretense. "Yesterday I was nobody. Today I'm wearing royal colors and being examined by the king's physician." He pushed away from the wall and approached, his movements fluid and controlled. "You saved the crown prince. Did you expect to return to obscurity?" "I hoped," she admitted. "I don't belong in this world of politics and power." Kane studied her with that unnerving intensity. "Few do, yet here we all are." He gestured to the box containing the bracelet. "You should wear it. Refusing royal gifts is inadvisable." With reluctance, Lyra opened the box and removed the bracelet. It was even more beautiful upon closer inspection, the tiny wolf figures so lifelike they seemed ready to leap from the metal. "Allow me," Kane offered, extending his hand. She hesitated before placing the bracelet in his palm. He fastened it around her wrist, his fingers warm against her skin. The contrast was striking. His large, scarred hand carefully securing the delicate silver band to her pale wrist. "Perfect fit," he murmured. Something in his tone made her glance up. His expression remained neutral, but there was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. It transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him appear younger, less forbidding. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," he said, straightening, "you prepare for tonight's feast. The king will formally acknowledge your deed before the assembled guests." Her heart sank. "Public recognition?" His lips quirked in a half-smile. "Not comfortable in the spotlight, little healer?" "Not remotely," she confirmed. "And please don't call me that." "What would you prefer? Lyra?" My name in his deep voice sounded different somehow, more significant. "It means harmony in the old tongue, a fitting name for a healer." She blinked at the unexpected insight. "It was my grandmother's choice." A shadow crossed his face. "The pendant you wear. It was hers?" Her hand instinctively rose to touch the silver talisman. Yes. How did you know? You touch it when you're anxious, he observed, like a tether to something safe. His perception unsettled her. She'd known this man for less than a day, yet he seemed to read her with disturbing ease. Will you tell me the truth now, Lyra Frost? Kane asked suddenly. About why you really ran into that fire? The question caught her off guard. I told you. I heard a child crying. Yes, but there's more. It wasn't a question. I can see it in your eyes, feel it in your hesitation. For a terrifying moment, she wondered if he somehow knew, if he had somehow uncovered the secret she'd buried so deeply that even she tried to forget it existed. But that was impossible. There's nothing more to tell, she insisted, rising from the chair. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should return to my duties. Elara will be wondering where I am. Your duties have changed, Kane informed her. By order of the king, you're relieved of your apprenticeship responsibilities until further notice. Panic fluttered in her chest. What? But my work— Your patients will be tended by others, he finished firmly. For now, you are to rest and prepare for tonight's ceremony. A chamber has been prepared for you in this wing. This wing? She echoed incredulously. The royal wing? Kane nodded. By direct order of the king. The implications were staggering. Commoners didn't reside in the royal quarters. Ever. Why would he— She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. Kane's expression became unreadable once more. The king has his reasons. It's not my place to question them, nor yours. He gestured toward a door she hadn't noticed before. Your temporary quarters. Everything you need has been provided. As she moved toward the indicated door, questions swirled through her mind like autumn leaves caught in a whirlwind. Why this excessive gratitude for a simple act of courage? Why the personal interest from both the king and his enforcer? What debt could possibly require her relocation to the royal wing? And beneath these questions lay a deeper fear, that somehow, in saving the prince, she had inadvertently exposed the very past she'd spent her life trying to outrun. The chamber Lyra had been given was more luxurious than any space she had ever occupied. Sunlight streamed through tall windows draped with blue silk, illuminating a bed large enough for 3 people, plush rugs scattered across polished floors, and a sitting area with cushioned chairs arranged before a small fireplace. A door to one side revealed a private bathing chamber with a copper tub that would require servants to fill. This wasn't merely a guest room, it was a noble's accommodation. The significance wasn't lost on her. This wasn't just gratitude, it was elevation. 2 young women arrived shortly after Lyra had finished exploring the chamber. They introduced themselves as Tessa and Iris, assigned as her attendants for the duration of her stay. They brought armfuls of clothing, silks and velvets and jewel tones, delicate lace, supple leather. The cost of a single gown likely exceeded her yearly stipend as an apprentice. This one, I think, for tonight, Tessa decided, holding up a gown of deep forest green. The bodice was embroidered with silver thread that would complement the wolf bracelet perfectly. As they helped her prepare, Lyra couldn't help but marvel at how perfectly the dress fit, as though it had been made specifically for her. When she mentioned this, the attendants exchanged a quick glance. The royal tailor is very skilled, Iris offered vaguely. He can often determine measurements at a glance. But Lyra caught the lie in her quickened pulse. This dress hadn't been hastily assembled since yesterday's fire. It had been waiting, as though her arrival had been anticipated. By the time evening fell, Lyra had been bathed, dressed, and adorned like a high-born lady. Her silver blonde hair had been arranged in an elegant style with delicate pins, her face subtly enhanced with cosmetics. When she looked in the mirror, a stranger stared back, ethereal, almost otherworldly. A knock at the door announced Kane's arrival. He had exchanged his warrior's attire for formal court dress, a midnight blue tunic embroidered with silver, fitted black trousers, and a short cape fastened with the royal crest. The ensemble emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. "You clean up well, little healer," he said, his voice lower than usual. Lyra lifted her chin. "As do you." Kane extended his arm. "The king awaits. Are you ready?" No, she wanted to say, I'll never be ready for this. Instead, she placed her hand on his offered arm and nodded. Remember, he murmured as they left the chamber, keep your head high. You've earned your place at the high table tonight. The great hall had been further transformed since morning. Hundreds of candles bathed the space in golden light, reflecting off silver tableware and crystal goblets. Long tables arranged in a horseshoe shape filled the room, with the high table on a raised platform at the head. As Cain and Lyra entered, a hush fell over the assembled guests. Every eye turned toward them, some curious, some envious, some openly hostile. She spotted the local alpha and his daughter seated near the high table, their expressions carefully neutral, despite the whispers rippling through the crowd. Chin up, Cain reminded her quietly. Show no fear. They approached the high table where the king sat with Prince Noah at his right hand. 2 empty seats waited at his left, one for Cain, and remarkably, one for her. The king gestured to the empty chair, and Lyra took the offered seat, conscious of the stares burning into her back. Prince Noah beamed at her from across the table, his innocent happiness a stark contrast to the politically charged atmosphere. You look pretty, he stage whispered, earning a small smile from his father. Thank you, Your Highness, she replied softly. The king raised his goblet, and the hall fell silent once more. Tonight, he began, his powerful voice carrying effortlessly to every corner of the room, we celebrate not only the alliance between our packs, but the courage of one who acted without thought for herself. He turned slightly toward Lyra, his expression solemn. Yesterday, when fire threatened my son's life, when protocol and fear stayed the hands of trained warriors, this young woman ran into the flames without hesitation. Lyra Frost saved the future king of our territories, suffering injury to shield him from harm. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the king continued. Such courage deserves recognition. Such selflessness demands reward. He set down his goblet and rose, prompting everyone in the hall to stand as well. Lyra Frost, step forward. On legs that threatened to buckle, she obeyed, moving to stand before the king. From the corner of her eye, she saw Cain shift slightly, positioning himself closer, as though prepared to catch her if she faltered. For your service to the crown, the king declared formally, I name you friend of the royal family, with all rights and privileges thereof. From this day forward, you shall be welcome in any territory under our rule, afforded the protection of our name, and granted a permanent position within the royal household should you wish it. The pronouncement sent a shockwave through the assembly. Friend of the royal family was an honorary title rarely bestowed, and never, to her knowledge, on someone of her low rank. Furthermore, the king continued before she could respond, to honor the life debt owed for my son's safety, I offer you your heart's desire. Name it, and if it is within my power to grant, it shall be yours. The hall held its collective breath. This was the moment, the discharge of the life debt Alara had warned about. Whatever she asked for now would define her future. Her fingers found her grandmother's pendant, drawing strength from its familiar contours. And suddenly, she knew. Your Majesty is most generous, she began, her voice steadier than she'd expected. If it pleases you, I would ask for the restoration of the village herbalist's cottage destroyed in yesterday's fire and supplies to establish a healing center there for those who cannot travel to the pack house for treatment. Surprise flickered across the king's face, followed by something that might have been approval. Beside him, Cain's expression remained carefully neutral, but she caught a glimmer of what seemed like admiration in his dark eyes. A selfless request, the king acknowledged, fitting for one who has demonstrated such selflessness already. He nodded once. It shall be done. The cottage will be rebuilt, larger and better equipped than before, and you shall oversee its operation as chief healer. Relief flooded through her. It was perfect. A position of respect that would allow her to continue her work while providing a legitimate reason to live apart from the main pack house, away from constant scrutiny, away from Cain and the king and the political machinations that surrounded them. But the king wasn't finished. Additionally, he continued, To cement the bond between our families, you will join us when we return to the royal seat in 3 days' time. There you will serve as personal healer to my son, who has requested your presence specifically." And just like that, her momentary victory crumbled. Leave. Go to the royal palace. Become part of the court. It was everything she'd hoped to avoid. "Your Majesty, I'm honored, but your skills are exceptional according to both your mentor and my physician," the king interjected smoothly. "And as the prince's rescuer, you have earned his trust. That is valuable." Something in his tone suggested layers of meaning beyond the obvious. "The position is not optional, Lyra Frost. It is part of my reward." Trapped. She was trapped by his generosity, by protocol, by the public nature of this exchange. To refuse now would be an insult, not just to the king, but to Prince Noah. "I am deeply honored, Your Majesty," she managed, dipping into another curtsy to hide the panic in her eyes. "Thank you for your generosity." The king smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. "The honor is mine, Lyra Frost." He turned to address the assembled guests once more. "Let the feast begin." As servants rushed to fill plates and goblets, she returned to her seat in a daze. 3 days. She had 3 days before her carefully constructed life would be completely upended, before she would be taken to the royal palace, the last place in all the territories she could afford to be recognized. "You're pale," Cain observed quietly beside her, his breath warm against her ear. "Eat something. The worst is over." She doubted that very much, but she forced herself to nibble at the delicacies placed before her. The food was exquisite. Tender roasted meats, vegetables prepared with exotic spices, sweet pastries drizzled with honey, but she tasted none of it. Throughout the feast, Lyra maintained a careful facade of gratitude and composure. She answered the prince's eager questions with gentle patience, responded to the king's occasional comments with appropriate deference, and ignored the speculative glances from nobles at nearby tables. Only Cain seemed to sense her distress, his scrutiny more thoughtful than the others. When the meal finally ended and musicians took their places for the evening's entertainment, she seized the opportunity to escape, if only briefly. "Please excuse me, Your Majesty," she murmured, rising from her seat. "I need a moment of air." The king nodded dismissively, already engaged in conversation with the local alpha. She slipped away from the high table, making her way toward a small side door that led to an exterior balcony. The cool night air was a blessed relief after the stifling atmosphere of the hall. She gripped the stone balustrade, drawing deep breaths to calm her racing thoughts. Stars glittered overhead, indifferent to the turmoil below. Running away already? She didn't need to turn to know Cain had followed her. His scent, pine and leather, and something uniquely his, announced his presence before his voice did. "Just breathing," she replied, not looking at him. The hall was becoming overwhelming. He moved to stand beside her, his tall frame blocking the gentle breeze. "You surprised him, you know," he said. "The king. He expected you to ask for gold, land, a title, perhaps." "I'm not interested in wealth or status." "So I see." There was a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. "What are you interested in, Lyra Frost?" The question was deceptively simple, yet dangerously complex. What could she possibly say that wouldn't reveal too much? "Peace," she answered finally. "Healing those who need it. A quiet life." "All things you're unlikely to find at court," Cain observed. "Yet that's exactly where I'm being sent." Cain was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "The king has his reasons." "So you keep saying," she countered, frustration seeping into her tone. "But what reasons could possibly justify uprooting me from everything I know? I'm nobody, just an herbalist's apprentice." "Are you?" The question hung between them, laden with implication. Her heart stuttered in her chest. What does that mean? Instead of answering directly, Cain reached out, his fingers brushing against her grandmother's pendant. "This symbol, do you know what it represents?" She stepped back, her hand rising protectively to the silver talisman. "It's just a family heirloom." "It's the mark of the Frost Moon Pack," he corrected quietly. a pack believed to be extinct for nearly 20 years. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Her grandmother's pendant, the only thing she had left of her original family, was a pack symbol? How could she not have known? "That's impossible," she whispered, though even as she said it, memories stirred. Fragmented images of similar pendants worn by others, of ceremonies around great bonfires where such symbols were prominently displayed. Kane's expression softened fractionally. The king recognized it immediately, as did I. "How?" she managed, her throat tight with sudden fear. "How would you recognize a symbol from an extinct pack?" "Because," he said carefully, "the Frost Moon Pack didn't simply die out. They were massacred by hunters, and the king's personal guard, led by me, arrived too late to save them." The revelation hit like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, her back pressing against the cold stone wall as fragments of memory assaulted her. Screams, flames, the scent of blood, a small hand torn from mine. "No," she gasped, shaking her head. "No, I can't." Kane moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You survived somehow. You were just a child then, 5, perhaps 6 years old. But those eyes—" He studied her intently. "I would recognize those eyes anywhere. They haunted me for years afterward, the child we couldn't find, the last frost." Her legs threatened to give way beneath her. All these years of hiding, of reinventing herself, of suppressing memories too painful to face, undone in an instant by this man's recognition. "Does he know?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "The king?" "He suspects," Kane confirmed. "Your reaction just now confirms it." She closed her eyes, fighting for composure. "Are you going to tell him?" "That depends." "On what?" "On you." Kane's proximity was both threatening and oddly comforting. On why the last survivor of the Frost Moon Pack has hidden her identity for so long. On why she flinches at the mention of her own heritage. The accusation in his tone stung. "You think I'm ashamed of who I am, that I hide out of cowardice?" "I think," he said deliberately, "that you're running from something. Or someone." He was too close to the truth, dangerously close, but she couldn't tell him everything. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. "The hunters," she said finally, offering a partial truth. "The ones who killed my pack. I was afraid they'd find me if they knew a frost had survived." It wasn't a lie, not exactly, just an incomplete explanation that omitted the most damning details. Kane considered this, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "The hunters were dealt with years ago, their entire network dismantled. They pose no threat to you now." Relief and disbelief warred within her. "You're certain?" "I executed their leader myself," he stated flatly. "The king made hunting our kind a capital offense after the Frost Moon massacre. No such organized threat exists in our territories anymore." She should have felt reassured. Instead, anxiety continued to claw at her insides. Because it wasn't just the hunters she feared. It was what they knew about her, what they had discovered that terrible night, the reason they had come for her pack in the first place. "If what you say is true," she began cautiously, "then why insist I come to court? If the king knows who I am, why not simply say so?" Kane's gaze was penetrating. "Because the Frost Moon Pack were more than just another werewolf clan. They were the keepers of old magic, rituals and knowledge dating back to the first change. Their extinction left a void in our understanding of our own history, our own potential." She hadn't expected this answer. "And the king thinks I have this knowledge? I was a child when they died. I remember almost nothing of that time." "Memory lives in more than the mind, Lyra. It lives in blood, in instinct." Kane's hand moved to her wrist, his thumb brushing over the pulse point beneath the silver bracelet. "Your healing abilities are extraordinary according to your mentor, beyond mere herb lore. That suggests your heritage manifests whether you acknowledge it or not." His words triggered another fragment of memory, her grandmother guiding her small hands over a wounded bird, teaching her to feel the life force within it, to coax that energy toward healing. She'd dismissed such recollections as childish fantasy. "What if I'm just an herbalist?" she insisted, pulling her wrist from his grasp. Nothing more. Cain didn't press the point, but skepticism was clear in his expression. "Regardless, the king wants you at court, and not just for the prince's sake." A chill ran down her spine. "What does that mean?" "It means," he said carefully, "that you've become valuable in ways beyond your heroic act. The last frost, the heir to lost knowledge, a symbol of survival against impossible odds." His voice softened fractionally. "And possibly the key to healing old wounds, both the king's and the prince's." Before she could question him further, the balcony door opened, spilling golden light into their secluded corner. Prince Noah stood there, his small face alight with excitement. "There you are! There you," he exclaimed. "Father says the dancing is about to start, and I want Lyra to watch me. I've been practicing." The tension between Lyra and Cain dissolved in the face of the boy's innocent enthusiasm. She managed to smile, pushing aside the weight of revelations for the moment. "I wouldn't miss it for the world, Your Highness." As they followed Noah back into the hall, Cain leaned close to whisper in her ear, "This conversation isn't finished." She knew he was right. The truth, or at least part of it, had been revealed. There would be no retreating back into anonymity now. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of music, dancing, and forced smiles. She watched as Prince Noah performed a formal court dance with the local alpha's young daughter, his serious concentration at odds with his childish features. The king appeared pleased. Cain remained vigilant at his side, and she counted the minutes until she could retreat to her temporary chamber. When finally granted permission to withdraw, she practically fled the great hall. But instead of the solitude she craved, she found Tessa waiting in her room, ready to assist with undressing. "Did you enjoy the feast, miss?" she asked cheerfully as she helped Lyra out of the green gown. "It was overwhelming," Lyra admitted. Tessa nodded sympathetically as she hung the gown in a massive wardrobe that now contained a full collection of clothing in her size. "Everyone's talking about your appointment as the prince's healer. It's a great honor." "Yes," Lyra agreed automatically. "A great honor." After Tessa departed, she changed into a simple nightgown and sat before the window, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across the floor. Her mind whirled with the night's revelations. The frost moon pack, the pendant, Cain's recognition, the king's suspicions. For 15 years, she'd suppressed the trauma of that terrible night, the night her pack was destroyed. She'd remade herself, hidden in plain sight, convinced that anonymity was her only protection. Now her carefully constructed identity was unraveling, and she had no idea what remained beneath the layers of deception. Sleep eluded her that night. Each time she drifted toward unconsciousness, nightmares jerked her awake. Fragments of memory she'd spent years suppressing now bubbled to the surface like poison from an infected wound. Dawn found her exhausted but resolute. If she couldn't escape her past or her future, she could at least face them on her own terms. The day following the feast passed in a strange limbo. Servants came and went, bringing meals Lyra barely touched, and messages from various nobles requesting audiences she politely declined. Elara visited briefly, bringing healing supplies and thinly veiled warnings about court politics. "Remember who your friends are," the old herbalist said as she departed. "And remember that at court, smiles often hide daggers." By late afternoon, restlessness drove Lyra from her chamber. She wandered the corridors of the pack house, eventually finding herself in a small interior garden she hadn't known existed. Stone benches surrounded a modest fountain where water trickled over smooth rocks into a shallow pool. The space was enclosed by high walls, offering privacy and a sense of sanctuary. She settled onto a bench, closing her eyes to absorb the peaceful atmosphere. The sound of the fountain reminded her of a similar one in her childhood home, where she had spent countless hours watching her grandmother perform healing rituals with water imbued with moonlight. Most people avoid this garden, They find it too austere." Lyra's eyes snapped open. Kane stood at the garden's entrance, his imposing figure silhouetted against the late afternoon sun. He had shed his formal attire from the previous night, returning to the practical leathers and rough-spun fabrics of a warrior. "I find it peaceful," she replied, making no move to leave despite the tension his presence created. "The sound of water is soothing." He approached slowly, as one might approach a skittish animal. "Your pack lived near a great waterfall, if I recall correctly. Perhaps that's why you're drawn to flowing water." The casual reference to her past startled her, though it shouldn't have after last night's revelations. "You seem to know a great deal about the Frost Moon Pack." "I made it my business to know," he said, settling onto the bench opposite hers, "after the massacre." "Why?" The question escaped before she could contain it. Something dark and complicated flickered across his features. "Guilt, failure, curiosity. Take your pick." "You said you arrived too late," she ventured. "What happened?" Kane was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the fountain. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "We received reports of hunter activity near your pack's territory. Unusual movements, suspicious gatherings. The king sent me with a contingent of elite guards to investigate." His jaw tightened. "We were delayed by a storm. By the time we arrived, the hunters had already come and gone. All we found was death." The clinical description still managed to evoke vivid images. Bodies in the snow, blood freezing in the bitter cold, the silence of a once vibrant community reduced to empty shells. "We searched for survivors," Kane continued, "found none, though there were tracks suggesting at least one person had escaped. Small footprints leading into the forest, eventually obscured by fresh snowfall." His eyes found hers. "Your tracks." She nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. "How did you survive?" The question held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Lyra closed her eyes, allowing the memories she'd suppressed for so long to surface. "My grandmother." She was the pack's head healer. "When the hunters came, she hid me in a root cellar beneath her healing hut, covered the entrance with herbs and soil, told me not to make a sound, no matter what I heard." Her voice faltered. "And I heard everything. The screams, the pleading, the silence after." Kane remained still, his face a mask of controlled emotion. "I stayed hidden for days, too terrified to emerge. Eventually hunger drove me out. There was nothing left, no one left." She swallowed hard. "So I ran. A merchant found me on the road, half-starved. He took me to a human settlement where I was eventually placed with a foster family. I never told them what I was or where I came from." "Yet you found your way back to our kind," Kane observed. "When my abilities began to manifest, healing capabilities I couldn't explain or control, I knew I needed guidance. Rumors led me to Alara. She took me in, taught me to channel my gift through traditional herbalism. It was safer that way, less noticeable." "And now?" Kane asked, leaning forward slightly. "Now that your identity is known, at least to the king and myself, what do you want, Lyra Frost?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted since this ordeal began. "I want," she began, then paused, considering her answer carefully. "I want to honor my pack's memory, to use the gifts I have to help others, but I don't want to be a symbol or a relic or a political asset." Kane's laugh was unexpected, a short, genuine sound of amusement. "Direct, like your grandmother." She blinked in surprise. "You knew her?" "We met once, many years ago. She was formidable." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You have her spirit." The comparison to her grandmother, the most courageous person she had ever known, stirred something deep within Lyra, a pride she had suppressed along with her memories. "The king believes you can help his son," Kane said, shifting the conversation. "Not just as a healer of the body, but of the spirit." "Because of my heritage," Lyra guessed. Kane nodded. The Frost Moon healers were known for their ability to treat ailments that transcended the physical. to reach the wounded soul. She thought of Prince Noah, of the shadows that sometimes darkened his young eyes, despite his outward cheerfulness. What happened to him? What wounded his spirit so deeply that the king would seek out lost magic to heal it? Cain's expression darkened. That is not my story to tell, but perhaps... He hesitated, then stood abruptly. Come with me. There's something you should see. Curiosity overrode caution, and Lyra followed him from the garden. They moved through lesser-used corridors, avoiding the main thoroughfares where nobles and servants might observe their passage. Eventually, they reached a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. Cain produced a key from somewhere within his clothing and unlocked the door. "The king's private study," he explained. "He's given me permission to show you this, though he doesn't know I'm doing so today." The room beyond was smaller than she had expected, but exuded an atmosphere of solemn purpose. Shelves lined with ancient books and scrolls covered 3 walls. The fourth held a large map of the known territories, with colored pins marking pack boundaries and alliances. A massive desk dominated the center, its surface neat but for a single leather-bound volume. Cain moved to the desk and opened the book, turning it to face her. "The king's personal journal from 3 years ago. Read this page." Lyra approached cautiously, her eyes falling on elegant script that spoke of profound grief. "My beloved queen is gone," she read aloud, "taken not by natural illness as we have led the court to believe, but by poison most foul. Dr. Thorne confirmed it today, a rare toxin derived from the moonshade flower, virtually undetectable once it has done its work. Someone within these walls murdered my mate, my love, my heart, and I am no closer to discovering who." She looked up at Cain, shock evident in her expression. "The queen was murdered?" "Yes," he confirmed grimly. "A fact known only to the king, myself, and Dr. Thorne, and now you. Why show me this?" "Read on," he urged. She returned her attention to the journal, continuing where she had left off. "Noah suffers nightmares. He was with her at the end, held her hand as she slipped away. No child should witness such a thing. He wakes screaming each night, convinced that shadows are coming to take him as they took his mother. The court physicians can find no remedy, and I fear the trauma has wounded something deep within his spirit, something beyond their ability to heal." Lyra's heart ached for the young prince. "This explains his attachment to me. I saved him from fire, from another potential loss." "There's more," Cain said quietly. She turned the page, finding a passage that made her blood run cold. Alaric believes there may be a connection between Arya's murder and the Frost Moon massacre 15 years ago. My beloved was researching the old prophecies, particularly the one speaking of the child of frost and flame who will unite the fractured packs. She had become convinced that a survivor of the Frost Moon pack existed, hidden somewhere within our territories. Did her search for this survivor lead her to discover something someone wished to remain hidden? Did she die for this knowledge? And if so, what am I risking by continuing her search? Lyra's hands trembled as she closed the journal. A prophecy? About a Frost Moon survivor? The queen was a scholar of our oldest legends, Cain explained. She believed that the hunters who attacked your pack weren't merely acting out of hatred for our kind, but specifically targeting the Frost Moon for their unique abilities and their connection to an ancient prophecy. Lyra shook her head, overwhelmed. This is madness. I'm no prophesied savior. I'm just a girl who survived when others didn't. Perhaps, Cain allowed, but consider this. You survived against impossible odds. You found your way back to our kind despite being raised among humans. You developed healing abilities without proper training. And now you've saved the crown prince from a fire that shows signs of deliberate magical origin. Coincidences, she insisted, though doubt crept into her voice. The king doesn't believe in coincidences, Cain said. Nor do I. Before she could respond, the study door opened. King Alaric stood in the threshold, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene before him. I see you've taken the initiative, Khan, he observed, closing the door behind him. I had planned to have this conversation under more formal circumstances. Cain bowed his head slightly. Forgive me, my king. I believed directness would serve better than ceremony in this case. The king's gaze shifted to Lyra, who immediately dropped into a curtsy. Rise, child. We are beyond such formalities now. As she straightened, the king moved to stand before her. Up close, she could see the toll grief had taken on him. Lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. So, he said quietly, the last of the Frost Moon Pack stands before me at last, after 15 years of searching. I didn't know anyone was searching for me, she admitted. Not at first, the king acknowledged. Initially, we believed no one survived the massacre. It was years later, when my queen began researching the old prophecies, that she became convinced a survivor existed. Pain flickered across his features at the mention of his mate. She never found you, but she left me clues to continue the search after her death. Your Majesty, Lyra began carefully, I am honored by your interest in my heritage, but I fear I cannot be what you seek. My memories of my pack's rituals and knowledge are fragmentary at best. Yet you managed to counter the magical symbols in the fire that trapped my son, the king countered, surprising her with his knowledge. The guards reported unusual blue light surrounding you both as you emerged from the building. She had hoped no one had noticed the counterspell she'd cast. A simple protection charm my grandmother taught me. Nothing significant. Nothing significant, the king repeated with a hint of irony. A charm that negated malevolent magic powerful enough to contain royal blood. I would call that very significant indeed. Lyra fell silent, unsure how to respond. My son has nightmares, the king continued, his voice softening. Not ordinary nightmares, but something deeper, something that drains his life force with each passing month. The court physicians are baffled. Even Dr. Thorne, the finest healer in 5 territories, can offer no remedy. And you think I can help him because of my bloodline, Lyra said, understanding dawning. I know you can, the king insisted. I've seen how he responds to you, the ease he finds in your presence. That alone is worth more to me than any political alliance or territorial gain. His honesty was disarming. This wasn't just a king speaking, but a father desperate to help his child. It was a side of the Alpha King she hadn't expected to see. Vulnerability beneath the crown. Before she could respond, a frantic knocking sounded at the study door. Without waiting for permission, a guard burst in, his face pale with alarm. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. It's the prince. He's having another episode, worse than before. The king's face transformed, fear replacing the careful control of moments before. Where? His chambers. Dr. Thorne is with him, but requests Miss Frost's presence immediately. All 3 of them ran from the study, the king leading the way through corridors, suddenly alive with urgent activity. Guards cleared paths for their passage. Servants pressed themselves against walls to avoid being trampled. They reached the prince's chambers to find the antechamber filled with worried attendants. Dr. Thorne emerged from the inner room, his expression grave. He's calling for you, he told Lyra without preamble. Has been since the episode began. From beyond the door came heart-wrenching sounds, a child's sobs interspersed with desperate cries. The Fire Lady! I want the Fire Lady! Without hesitation, Lyra pushed past the physician into the prince's bedchamber. The scene that greeted her chilled her blood. Noah thrashed on his bed, his small body arching as though in the grip of seizure. But it was the darkness surrounding him that truly alarmed her, a swirling shadow that seemed almost sentient in its movements, coiling around the child like spectral serpents. This was no ordinary nightmare. This was magic, dark, ancient, and purposeful. The king moved to approach his son, but Lyra held out a hand to stop him. No, it might latch onto you as well. She approached the bed slowly, instinct guiding her actions. Her grandmother's pendant grew warm against her skin, responding to the negative energy in the room. Noah, she called softly. I'm here. The Fire Lady is here. The child's thrashing subsided slightly at the sound of her voice, his tear-stained face turning toward her. "Make them go away," he begged. "The shadows want to take me like they took Mother." "I won't let them," she promised, reaching for her pendant. The silver talisman glowed faintly in her palm, responding to her will as it had in the fire. Ancient words rose unbidden to her lips, a healing chant she hadn't known she remembered. "Moonlight silver, starlight gold, banish shadows dark and cold. By the power of frost and flame, I cleanse this child in ancient name." Blue light emanated from the pendant, pushing against the darkness surrounding Noah. For a moment, the shadows seemed to resist, coalescing into more solid shapes that hissed with malevolent intent. Then, with a sound like distant thunder, they dissipated, fleeing through cracks in the windows and beneath the door. Noah collapsed back onto his pillows, his breathing slowly normalizing. Lyra placed a gentle hand on his forehead, channeling healing energy as her grandmother had taught her. His fever-bright skin cooled beneath her touch. "They're gone," he whispered, his eyes already growing heavy with healing sleep. "You made them go away." "Yes," she soothed. "Sleep now. They won't return tonight." As the prince drifted into peaceful slumber, Lyra became aware of the profound silence behind her. She turned to find the king, Cain, and Dr. Thorne staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to vindication. "That," the king said quietly, "was nothing significant. That was the magic of the Frost Moon healers at its most powerful." Dr. Thorne stepped forward, his scientific curiosity overcoming his usual reserve. "I've never seen anything like it. The negative energy was almost tangible, yet she dispersed it with a few words in that pendant." "Not just words in a pendant," Cain corrected. "Blood calls to blood. Magic recognizes its own." The king approached his sleeping son, tenderly brushing hair from the boy's peaceful face. When he looked up at Lyra, his expression had transformed. Gratitude, respect, and something akin to reverence mingled in his gaze. "Now do you understand why I searched for you?" he asked softly. "Why the queen believed so strongly in the prophecy? My son is not suffering ordinary nightmares. He is being hunted by the same darkness that took his mother. The same darkness that sought to eliminate your pack." Lyra sank into a nearby chair, suddenly drained from the magical exertion. "What darkness? What enemy haunts both our families?" The king exchanged a significant glance with Cain before answering. "We call them the Veiled Ones, an ancient order dedicated to preventing the fulfillment of the oldest prophecies. They believe our kind should remain divided, weakened by internal squabbles and territorial disputes. And this prophecy they fear? The one about a child of frost and flame?" Cain stepped forward. "It speaks of one born to the Frost Moon Pack who will unite the scattered territories under a single banner, bringing peace after centuries of division. One who will bridge the gap between old magic and new power. A queen of wolves," the king added. "Or so the ancient texts describe this figure." Lyra shook her head in disbelief. "And you think this is me? I'm no leader. I'm a healer, nothing more." "Perhaps," the king acknowledged, "or perhaps healing is where your journey begins, not where it ends." He gestured to his sleeping son. "You've done what no court physician could accomplish. You've banished the shadows, if only temporarily." "They'll return," she said with certainty, though she couldn't explain how she knew. "What I did tonight was a temporary measure, not a cure." "Then we must find a permanent solution," the king declared, "which is why your presence at court is more crucial than ever." Lyra looked from the peaceful face of the sleeping prince to the determined expressions of the king and Cain. She thought of her grandmother's final words. "Remember who you are, little one, last of the Frost Moon, last of our line." Perhaps this was what her grandmother had been preparing her for all along. Not just survival, but a return, a reclaiming of her heritage and its purpose. 3 days, she said finally. "You said we leave for the royal palace in 3 days.
I'll need that time to prepare, to gather what knowledge I can from Alara's archives about my pack's healing rituals. Relief washed over the king's face. You will have whatever resources you require. Cayenne will see to it. As if on cue, Kane stepped forward. We should also begin basic training. If the Veiled Ones have indeed returned, they will target you once they learn of your existence. Training? She questioned. Self-defense, he clarified. I can teach you enough to keep you alive until help arrives, should you be attacked. The practical suggestion grounded her in the midst of prophecies and ancient magics. This was real. The threat was real. And so was her responsibility to the young prince who slept peacefully for the first time in months, thanks to her intervention. Very well, she agreed. Training, research, and preparation. 3 days isn't much time, but it will have to suffice. As they left the prince's chamber, allowing him to rest under Dr. Thorne's watchful eye, the king placed a hand on Lyra's shoulder. Whether you believe in prophecies or not, he said quietly, you have given me something I had almost abandoned. Hope for my son's future. His hand fell away. For that alone, the resources of my kingdom are at your disposal. The weight of responsibility settled over Lyra like a cloak. 3 days to prepare for a journey that would take her far from the safety of anonymity into the glaring spotlight of royal attention. 3 days to begin reclaiming the heritage she had denied for 15 years. 3 days before her life would change forever. Dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose as the royal procession wound its way through the valley. Lyra rode near the center of the column, flanked by royal guards whose vigilant gazes constantly swept the surrounding terrain for threats. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the morning light, a constant reminder of her new position. 3 days had passed like a fever dream. 3 days of preparation, of hushed conversations with Alara about ancient healing techniques, of poring over fragmented texts that hinted at the Frost Moon Pack's once profound knowledge. 3 days of basic combat training with Kane, whose patience surprised her as he taught her to evade, to strike vulnerable points, to use an attacker's strength against them. 3 days of visiting Prince Noah, whose sleep remained peaceful after her intervention, his small face brightening each time she entered his chamber. Now they journeyed toward the royal palace, leaving behind the relative simplicity of the local pack's territory for the complex political landscape of the capital. The king rode at the head of the procession, Noah beside him on a dappled pony. Kane alternated between leading the vanguard and falling back to check on the rest of the party, his watchful gaze missing nothing. We'll reach the mountain pass by midday, he informed her during one such check. Rest at the Royal Hunting Lodge tonight. Arrive at the palace tomorrow afternoon. Lyra nodded, adjusting her position in the saddle. Despite Alara's soothing balm, her muscles protested the unaccustomed activity. Have you sensed anything unusual? Any signs of the Veiled Ones? A question that would have seemed absurd mere days ago now felt entirely natural. The world had shifted around her, revealing dangers and possibilities she had never imagined. Nothing obvious, Kane replied, his voice low. But they rarely show themselves directly. They prefer to work through others, manipulating events from the shadows. Like the fire at the village, she murmured. Precisely. His dark eyes held hers for a moment. Stay vigilant. Trust your instincts. As he rode ahead to rejoin the vanguard, Lyra found herself watching the fluid grace with which he handled his mount, the way his body moved in perfect harmony with the animal. For a man of his size, Kane possessed a remarkable elegance, a controlled power that spoke of centuries of discipline. She had learned much about him in the past 3 days, how he had survived nearly 300 years through a combination of skill and stubborn determination, how he had served 4 kings before Alaric, earning a reputation for absolute loyalty, how beneath his formidable exterior lay a keen intelligence and unexpected flashes of dry humor. What she hadn't learned was why he had taken such personal interest in her safety. His protectiveness seemed to extend beyond mere duty to his king. The procession continued through the morning,
winding steadily upward toward the mountain pass. Around midday, as Cain had predicted, they reached the highest point of their journey, a narrow passage between towering granite peaks. Guards moved ahead to secure the route, their weapons drawn, as they checked each potential ambush point. Lyra felt it first, a subtle wrongness that prickled along her skin like static before a storm. Her pendant grew warm against her chest, a warning. "Something's not right," she said to the female guard riding beside her. Before the guard could respond, chaos erupted at the front of the column. Shouts of alarm, the clash of steel, horses rearing in panic. "Ambush!" The cry rippled back through the procession. Guards closed ranks around Lyra as the attack unfolded ahead. Through gaps between their bodies, she caught glimpses of the confrontation. Figures in dark clothing swarming from concealed positions along the pass, the flash of silver weapons, Cain's commanding voice rising above the tumult, directing the defense. "The prince!" Someone shouted. "Protect the prince!" Lyra's heart seized. Noah. In the confusion, she couldn't see where he was, couldn't tell if he remained safe with his father. Without conscious thought, she urged her horse forward, pushing past the surprised guards. Her pendant pulsed with warmth, drawing her toward the center of the conflict like a beacon. She had no weapon, no combat experience beyond Cain's basic lessons, yet something deeper than rational thought propelled her forward. The scene that greeted her sent ice through her veins. The king fought back to back with his personal guards, surrounded by attackers whose fluid movements spoke of extensive training. Noah's pony stood riderless nearby, stamping nervously. And there, at the edge of the confrontation, a dark, cloaked figure dragged the struggling prince toward a narrow path leading away from the main pass. "Noah!" she cried. The prince's head snapped up at her voice, his face pale with terror. "Lyra!" The cloaked figure turned, revealing a bone-white mask beneath the hood. Emotionless eye slits regarded her for a heartbeat before the figure redoubled its efforts, lifting the prince bodily and sprinting toward the side path. Lyra spurred her horse forward, focused solely on reaching Noah. As she closed the distance, the pendant at her throat blazed with sudden heat. Words formed in her mind, ancient and powerful, rising from some deep ancestral memory. "Frost bind, wind whirl, halt those who would harm blood royal," she cried, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to echo from the mountain stones themselves. The air before the kidnapper crystallized, forming a barrier of swirling ice particles that blocked the escape path. The cloaked figure skidded to a halt, still clutching the prince. Lyra slid from her horse, approaching steadily despite her hammering heart. "Release him," she commanded. The masked face turned toward her. Though she couldn't see the eyes behind the slits, she felt their hatred burning into her. "Frost Moon Witch," the figure hissed. "You should have remained hidden." A blade appeared in the kidnapper's free hand, pressing against Noah's throat. "Stay back, or the princeling bleeds." Lyra froze, terror threatening to overwhelm her. One wrong move and Noah would die. A shadow detached itself from the rocks above, descending with lethal precision. Cain landed directly behind the kidnapper, his movement so swift it seemed almost supernatural. One powerful arm locked around the attacker's throat, while the other wrenched away the blade. "Run, Noah!" Lyra cried. The prince bolted toward her as Cain wrestled the kidnapper to the ground. She gathered Noah into her arms, feeling him tremble against her. His skin burned with fear sweat, his breathing ragged against her neck. "I've got you," she murmured. "You're safe." Over Noah's shoulder, she watched as Cain subdued the kidnapper with brutal efficiency. A sharp twist, and the attacker went limp. When Cain removed the mask, Lyra was surprised to see a woman's face, young and ordinary, save for the fanatical hatred in her eyes. "A veiled one," Cain confirmed grimly, binding the unconscious woman's wrists. "Not a leader, a foot soldier." The king appeared, blood spattering his cloak from the fight. When he saw Noah safe in Lyra's arms, naked relief transformed his face. He gathered his son from her embrace, holding him with fierce protectiveness. "The attack was coordinated," Cain reported. Time to strike when we were most vulnerable. They knew our route, our timing. Someone within the palace provided information, the king agreed, his voice hard with controlled rage. Find them, Cain, whatever it takes. As the royal guards secured the captured attackers and tended the wounded, Lyra became aware of the stares directed her way. The ice barrier she had conjured still shimmered in the air, slowly dissipating in the afternoon sun, evidence of magic that couldn't be explained away or ignored. Cain approached, his expression unreadable. That spell. Where did you learn it? Lyra shook her head, bewildered. I didn't. The words just came to me, as if someone else were speaking through my lips. Blood memory, he said quietly. The knowledge of your ancestors awakening in moments of great need. It confirms what we suspected. Your gifts run deeper than even you realized. The king joined them, Noah still held securely in his arms. The prince tells me you were trying to reach him even before the kidnapper was visible to most of us. How did you know? I felt it, she admitted. A wrongness, a threat specifically aimed at Noah. She touched her pendant. This guided me. The king studied her with renewed intensity. Such a connection is rare. It suggests your magical affinity extends beyond healing. Protection magic, Cain elaborated. Another specialty of the Frost Moon healers. They could sense threats to those under their care, create wards against specific dangers. Noah, his initial fear subsiding, regarded Lyra with undisguised awe. You made ice out of nothing, like in the stories. Not nothing, she corrected gently. From the moisture in the air. From the essence of winter that lives in these mountains. She wasn't entirely sure how she knew that, but the explanation felt right. Felt true, in a way that transcended conscious understanding. We cannot linger here, the king decided. The hunting lodge is too exposed after this attack. We ride directly for the palace. He turned to Cain. Double the vanguard, triple the rear guard. No stops until we reach the outer walls. As the procession reorganized, Lyra found herself riding closer to the king and prince, her position elevated from mid-column to the protected center. A tangible acknowledgement of her new status, not merely as the prince's healer, but as someone whose abilities were valuable enough to warrant royal protection. The journey continued at a more punishing pace, the entire party tense with vigilance after the ambush. When darkness fell, they rode on with torches, sacrificing comfort for security. Noah eventually succumbed to exhaustion, sleeping against his father in the saddle. Lyra watched him anxiously, alert for any sign of the shadow nightmares returning, but his sleep appeared peaceful, despite the day's trauma. Midnight had passed when the royal palace finally appeared on the horizon, its massive stone walls illuminated by hundreds of torches. Even at this distance and in darkness, the scale impressed. This was not merely a residence, but a fortress, designed to withstand sieges in the ancient wars between packs. Cain guided his mount alongside hers as they approached. Home, he said simply. Yours, perhaps, she replied, unable to keep the apprehension from her voice. His eyes, gleaming like amber in the torchlight, studied her face. It could be yours as well, in time. Before she could question what he meant, horns sounded from the palace walls, announcing the king's arrival. The great gate swung open, revealing an inner courtyard teeming with guards and servants. Their journey was over, but Lyra sensed that her true challenges were only beginning. The royal palace revealed itself as a labyrinth of intersecting corridors, grand chambers, and hidden passages. After a brief welcome ceremony, Lyra had been escorted to chambers that dwarfed the generous accommodations she'd occupied in the local pack house. A sitting room, bedchamber, private bathing room, and small study comprised her personal quarters, all furnished with an elegance that made her previous life seem Spartan by comparison. Tessa and Iris, who had traveled with the royal party, efficiently unpacked her belongings while she bathed away the dust of travel. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. The events of the ambush replayed in her mind, particularly the moment when ancient words had risen unbidden to her lips, summoning power she hadn't known she possessed. Dawn found her at the window of her sitting room, watching the royal city awaken beyond the palace walls. Rooftops stretched to the horizon, smoke rising from countless chimneys as the capital stirred to life. This was the seat of power for all werewolf territories, the center from which King Alaric maintained the fragile alliances between previously warring packs. A soft knock at her door announced Dr. Thorne, who had traveled ahead of the main party to prepare for their arrival. "The prince asks for you," he informed her. "He seems agitated after yesterday's events." Lyra followed the physician through the palace to Noah's chambers, located in the secure heart of the royal wing. She found the young prince sitting cross-legged on his bed, a leather-bound book open before him. When he saw her, his face brightened. "Lyra! I was reading about the Frost Moon Pack. Did you know your people could talk to wolves? Real wolves, not just were ones?" She smiled at his enthusiasm, relieved to see no apparent trauma from the kidnapping attempt. "Is that what your book says?" "Yes, it says your ancestors had a special connection with the northern wolf packs, that they learned healing secrets by watching how wolves treated their injured." She settled beside him on the bed, curious despite herself. "May I see?" The book appeared ancient, its pages yellowed with age, the illustrations rendered in a style centuries old. As Noah eagerly pointed out passages about her pack, she found herself absorbing information she had never known about her own heritage. The book described ritual healing circles, seasonal ceremonies tied to the moon phases, and indeed a unique relationship with the true wolves of the northern territories. "Where did you get this book, Your Highness?" "Father's private library," Noah admitted with a hint of mischief. "I'm not supposed to take books without permission, but I wanted to know more about you." His innocent curiosity touched her. "Well, perhaps we should return it before anyone notices." "Too late for that," came a deep voice from the doorway. Cain stood there, his imposing frame nearly filling the entrance. Despite his stern words, amusement glinted in his eyes as he regarded the prince's guilty expression. "The king requests both your presences in the royal archives," he informed them. "It seems Prince Noah's interest in the Frost Moon Pack is fortuitously timed." Noah scrambled from the bed, clutching the book. "Are we in trouble?" "For your academic curiosity? Hardly," Cain assured him. "Though in future, ask before borrowing from the restricted sections." As they followed Cain through the palace, Lyra noted subtle changes in his demeanor. Here, in the seat of royal power, he moved with even greater authority. Guards and servants alike showed him deference bordering on fear, stepping aside as he approached, gazes lowered respectfully. The demon wolf, the king's shadow. His reputation had substance here, where stories of his loyalty and ruthlessness had been born. The royal archives occupied an entire wing of the palace, a vast repository of knowledge collected over centuries. The king awaited them in a circular chamber at its heart, surrounded by ancient texts spread across a massive oak table. Lord Magnus Blackthorne, the king's elderly advisor, whom Lyra had briefly met during the journey, stood at his side. "Ah, my son the scholar," King Alaric greeted Noah with gentle reproach. "Next time, ask before borrowing." "Some of these texts are the only copies in existence." Noah ducked his head. "Yes, father." The king's attention shifted to Lyra. "I trust you rested well after our eventful journey?" "As well as could be expected, Your Majesty," she replied diplomatically. "Good, because today your real work begins." He gestured to the texts surrounding him. "These are the surviving records of the Frost Moon Pack's healing traditions, ritual practices, and prophetic writings. Most were salvaged from your settlement after the massacre. Others were already in our possession, gifts from your ancestors to mine during more harmonious times." Lyra approached the table slowly, her heart quickening at the sight of familiar symbols among the writings. The crescent moon, cradling a star, surrounded by frost patterns, appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. "I've had scholars studying these for years," the king continued, "but they are limited by their outsider perspective. Many passages refer to knowledge passed orally, never committed to writing. Knowledge that might still exist in your blood memory if we can find a way to access it. Lord Magnus stepped forward, his aged face creasing with skepticism. "If I may, Your Majesty, we cannot be certain that the girl possesses such memories. Her age at the time of the massacre would have limited her formal training." "Yet she summoned ice magic on instinct alone," Kane countered. "Words she claims never to have learned sprang to her lips in a moment of crisis." The elderly advisor regarded Lyra with poorly concealed suspicion. "Convenient, is it not, that she should possess exactly the abilities we seek, exactly when we need them?" "You suggest deception, Lord Magnus?" Kane's voice held a dangerous edge. "I suggest caution," Magnus replied smoothly. "The prophecy has been misinterpreted before, with devastating consequences. The Queen's obsession with finding a Frost Moon survivor led her down dangerous paths." The king's expression hardened. "Careful, old friend. You approach treasonous ground." An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. Lyra sensed undercurrents of old arguments, of political positions she didn't yet understand. Noah, innocent of the tension, broke the standoff by tugging at her sleeve. "Show them the ice magic," he urged, "like you did in the mountains." All eyes turned to her. Lyra felt a flash of panic. "I don't know if I can. Yesterday was different. There was danger, immediate threat." "Magic responds to need," the king acknowledged, "but also to focus, to intention." He selected a particular text from the table, opening it to a marked page. This describes a basic focusing technique used by Frost Moon initiates, a method to channel the natural energy in your blood. Lyra studied the illustrated instructions. A simple meditation, visualizing energy flowing from heart to hands, crystallizing into tangible form. She recognized elements of what her grandmother had taught her for healing, adapted for a different purpose. "I can try," she said hesitantly. Closing her eyes, she touched her pendant and concentrated on the sensation she'd experienced during the ambush. The connection to something ancient and powerful, flowing through her veins like liquid moonlight. She directed that energy as the text described, from heart to hand, visualizing it taking physical form. A collective gasp made her eyes fly open. Above her outstretched palm hovered a small, perfectly formed snowflake, crystalline and intricate, glowing with faint blue light. "Extraordinary," the king murmured. "On your first attempt." Noah clapped his hands in delight. "I knew you could do it." Lord Magnus's expression darkened. "Parlor tricks prove nothing. The prophecy speaks of one who will unite the territories, not merely conjure pretty baubles." The snowflake dissolved as Lyra's concentration broke. "I don't claim to fulfill any prophecy. I'm simply trying to understand abilities I never knew I had." "A wise approach," Kane commented, giving Magnus a pointed look. "Learning before claiming. Perhaps others could benefit from such humility." The advisor stiffened, but held his tongue. "You'll have full access to these archives," the king decided. "Study what you can. Practice what you learn. Kane will continue your defensive training, and you will work with Dr. Thorne to integrate your healing methods with his medical knowledge." "And the prince?" Lyra asked. "You will spend time with him daily," the king said. "Not just for healing sessions, but to build the bond between you. Whatever shadow magic afflicts him, your presence seems to counteract it." As the meeting concluded, Lyra found herself assigned a royal scholar to assist with her research, a quiet, bespectacled man named Thaddeus, who seemed more comfortable with books than people. Kane accompanied them to a smaller study where they could work undisturbed. "Lord Magnus seems to dislike me," Lyra observed once they were alone. Kane's expression revealed nothing. Magnus has served 3 kings. His loyalty to the crown is unquestioned, but he represents the old guard, traditional, conservative, skeptical of change. "And I represent change?" "More than you know," Kane replied cryptically. "Study well, little healer. I'll return for you at midday. Your combat training continues regardless of your new scholarly pursuits." With that, he departed, leaving Lyra to immerse herself in the written legacy of her people. Hours passed as she pored over ancient texts, Thaddeus providing context and translation when needed. She found herself absorbing information with surprising ease, as though part of her had always known these traditions, these rituals, these philosophies that had shaped her ancestors. Descriptions of healing ceremonies triggered vague memories of sitting at her grandmother's feet, watching similar practices. Passages about moonlight infusion recalled the taste of herbal preparations consumed during full moon gatherings. By midday, when Cain returned to escort her to the training yards, her mind buzzed with rediscovered knowledge. The physical exertion of combat practice provided welcome balance, grounding her in the present even as her thoughts kept returning to the texts. For the next several days, this became her routine. Mornings spent in study, afternoons in physical training, evenings with Noah, telling him stories or performing small magical demonstrations that delighted him while simultaneously strengthening her control. On the 5th day, she made a significant discovery. Tucked within a volume of seemingly mundane herbal remedies, she found a hidden page, revealed only when she accidentally spilled tea on the parchment. The liquid activated invisible ink, bringing forth text written in the oldest form of wolf script. "Thaddeus," she called excitedly, "can you read this?" The scholar adjusted his spectacles, peering at the revealed writing. "Extraordinary," he murmured. "This is ritual script, used only for the most sacred ceremonies. My translation will be imperfect, but—" He worked carefully, transcribing the ancient symbols into modern language. When he finished, he looked up at Lyra with widened eyes. "It's the full prophecy," he whispered. "Not the fragments we've been working with, but the complete text." Lyra leaned forward, scanning his translation. "When shadow falls across throne and air, seek the child of frost and flame, last blood of moon's chosen line, bearer of healing and harbinger of change. Born under winter stars, tested by fire, betrayed by trusted hand, saved by divided heart. Through her, old wounds mend, new bonds form, territories unite under a crown reforged. Shadow and light shall battle within and without, until truth burns away deception's veil." She read it twice, 3 times, feeling the words resonate with something deep within her spirit. Born under winter stars. She had been born during the winter solstice. Tested by fire. The village fire, where she had saved Noah, certainly qualified. "I need to show this to the king," she decided. Thaddeus nodded, already copying the translation onto fresh parchment. "I'll arrange an audience immediately." "No need," came a familiar voice from the doorway. "The king is otherwise occupied with diplomatic matters." Lord Magnus entered the study, his aged face set in lines of forced pleasantry. "Perhaps I can be of assistance. I have some expertise in prophetic interpretation." Something in his tone raised Lyra's hackles. The pendant at her throat grew subtly warm, a warning she had learned to heed. "Thank you, Lord Magnus, but this should go directly to His Majesty. The prophecy appears more specific than previously understood." Magnus moved closer, his gaze falling on the translated text. Something flickered across his features, too swift to interpret. Of course. Most intriguing. But surely there's no rush. The king has many demands on his attention today." "Nonetheless, I believe he would want to see this immediately," she insisted. The elderly advisor's demeanor shifted subtly, his forced cordiality hardening into something colder. "You presume much, girl. Your position here is precarious, dependent entirely on the king's goodwill. It would be wise not to overreach." Thaddeus shrank back from the confrontation, but Lyra held her ground. "Is there some reason you don't want the king to see this, Lord Magnus?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implication. For a moment she thought she glimpsed something alien in the old man's eyes, a darkness that didn't belong. "You should be careful, Frost Moon Witch," he said softly. "Not all in this palace welcome your kind. The old magics died for good reason." Without waiting for her response, he turned and left the study, his robe swishing against the stone floor. Thaddeus exhaled shakily. "I've never seen Lord Magnus speak so ominously. He's always been stern but courteous." "Find Cain," Lyra instructed, a sense of urgency growing within her. "Tell him what happened. Tell him I need to speak with the king immediately." As Thaddeus hurried off, Lyra gathered the original document and the translation, securing them within her clothing. Instinct told her not to leave such evidence unattended. She made her way through the palace corridors, intending to find Prince Noah. Something about Magnus's behavior suggested immediate danger, and her protective instincts centered on the vulnerable boy. She found the prince in his chambers, playing with carved wooden animals under the supervision of his tutor. The relief she felt upon seeing him safe was palpable. "Lyra!" he exclaimed happily. "Have you come for stories?" "Perhaps later, Your Highness," she replied, trying to keep her voice light despite her inner tension. "I just wanted to check on you." The tutor, a stern woman named Isolde, regarded her with disapproval. "The prince is in the middle of his lessons. The king was most specific about not interrupting his schedule." "Of course," Lyra conceded. "I'll return at the usual time." As she turned to leave, Noah called out, "Wait! I want to show you what Lord Magnus brought me." He rummaged in a small box beside him, withdrawing a silver amulet on a chain. "He said it would protect me from bad dreams." Lyra froze, her blood turning to ice. The amulet bore a symbol she had seen in the ancient texts, but with a critical alteration. What should have been a protective sigil had been subtly modified into its opposite, a beacon for negative energies. "Noah," she said carefully, "may I see that?" The prince handed it over, without hesitation. The moment the metal touched her palm, her pendant flared hot against her skin, a violent reaction to the corrupted magic. "When did Lord Magnus give you this?" she asked, keeping her voice casual despite the alarm coursing through her. "This morning. He said to wear it tonight when I sleep." Noah tilted his head curiously. "Is something wrong with it?" "No," she lied smoothly. "It's just very old, very special. I'd like to cleanse it properly before you wear it. May I borrow it for today?" Noah nodded trustingly. "Will you bring it back for bedtime?" "Of course," she promised, though she had no intention of returning the malevolent object. "Now, I should let you return to your studies." The tutor watched their exchange with narrowed eyes, but said nothing as Lyra departed. In the corridor outside, she examined the amulet more carefully. The corruption was subtle, detectable only to someone familiar with the original symbol, a clever perversion of protective magic into something that would amplify rather than repel the shadow entities that had plagued Noah. She needed to find Cain or the king immediately. Footsteps approached from an intersecting corridor. Lyra glanced up, expecting to see a guard or servant. Instead, Lord Magnus stood before her, flanked by two men she didn't recognize. Their posture and bearing marked them as warriors, though they wore no royal insignia. "I see you found my gift to the prince," Magnus observed, his elderly facade dropping away to reveal something harder, more dangerous. "How inconvenient." Lyra took a step backward, clutching the amulet tightly. "What have you done, Magnus? This object is corrupted. It would have harmed Noah." "Harmed? No, no. Merely ensured the continuation of his nightmares, his slow descent into madness." The old advisor smiled thinly. "The king's line must end. The prophecy must remain unfulfilled. The Pax must remain divided, weakened, controllable." Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. "You're one of them, a veiled one. I am their voice in this palace, their eyes and ears for over 40 years. Pride infused his voice. "I who arranged the queen's demise when she came too close to discovering you. I who ensured the prince would never know peace in his dreams." "You murdered the queen?" Shock and revulsion washed over her. "Your own queen? Necessary sacrifice." "She was too clever, too determined, just like you." His gaze hardened. "The king is occupied with diplomatic matters I arranged. Cain is investigating a false lead I provided. No one will interrupt what happens next." The two warriors moved forward, drawing daggers from beneath their cloaks. Lyra backed further away, her mind racing. She had learned much in her days of study and training, but faced with trained killers, her newfound knowledge seemed woefully inadequate. "Seize her," Magnus commanded, quietly. "We'll make it appear she attacked the prince, forcing us to eliminate her. A tragic end to the Frost Moon legacy." As the men advanced, Lyra's pendant burned against her skin. The amulet in her hand seemed to pulse with negative energy, repulsive yet somehow useful. An idea formed, desperate but possible. She focused her will as she had been practicing, drawing energy from her core into her hand. But this time, instead of creating ice, she channeled her power into the corrupted amulet, using its malevolent structure as a conduit. "Reveal true nature, expose false face, turn dark purpose back upon its source," she chanted. The amulet shattered in her palm, releasing a wave of energy that slammed into Magnus and his men. They staggered backward, momentarily disoriented. It wouldn't last long, but it might give her the seconds she needed. Lyra ran, not away from the danger, but toward Noah's chambers. If Magnus had intended to frame her for attacking the prince, the boy remained in danger. She burst through the door, startling the tutor and Noah. "We need to leave," she told the prince urgently. "Now!" The tutor rose, indignant. "What is the meaning of this interruption? I told you." "Lord Magnus is a traitor," Lyra cut her off. "He means to harm the prince. We must get him somewhere safe immediately." Whether it was the conviction in her voice or some innate sense of the danger, Isolde's expression shifted from outrage to concern. "The king's private chambers. They're warded against intruders." "Yes, go," Lyra agreed. "I'll create a diversion." The tutor swept Noah into her arms, the boy's eyes wide with confusion and fear. "What about you?" he asked Lyra. "I'll be right behind you," she promised. "Go now, quickly." As they slipped out through a servant's entrance, Lyra heard running footsteps approaching down the main corridor. The warriors, recovered from her magical attack, would be upon her in moments. She had no weapon, no real combat experience beyond Kane's basic lessons. But she had something they didn't expect, understanding of her own power, growing stronger by the day. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself as the ancient texts described. When the men burst through the door, weapons drawn, she was ready. "Frostbind, wind whirl!" And the spell she had cast during the ambush came more easily this time, directed with precise intention. Ice crystals formed in the air, swirling in a vortex that surrounded the first warrior. He cried out as the magical cold penetrated his clothing, slowing his movements, numbing his extremities. The second man hesitated, momentarily stunned by the display of power. That second of hesitation was all she needed. Lyra darted past him, using the evasion techniques Kane had drilled into her. Not engaging directly, simply creating distance, buying time. She raced through the corridors, aware of pursuit behind her. Guards should have been present, but the hallways stood eerily empty. Magnus's influence had cleared her path, not for escape but for quiet elimination. Now it worked in her favor. Rounding a corner at full speed, she collided with a solid wall of muscle. Strong hands steadied her, preventing her from falling. She looked up into Kane's face, his expression shifting from surprise to alert tension as he registered her panic. "Magnus!" she gasped. "He's a traitor, veiled one, tried to kill me. The prince is safe," Kane finished for her. "I found Thaddeus. He told me enough to send royal guards to Noah. Where is Magnus now?" "Behind me, with assassins." She clutched his arm. "He confessed to murdering the queen, to causing Noah's nightmares. He's been working against the king for decades." Fury transformed Kane's features, cold and terrible. "Stay behind me." He drew his sword, the blade gleaming with lethal purpose in the corridor's torchlight. When the warriors appeared around the corner, they skidded to a halt at the sight of the king's enforcer, naked steel in his hand and death in his eyes. "Surrender," Kane commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "By order of the king." The men exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their options. One raised his hands in submission. The other, perhaps braver or more foolish, charged forward, dagger aimed at Kane's heart. What followed happened so quickly, Lyra could barely track the movements. Kane sidestepped the attack with preternatural speed, his sword flashing once, twice. The attacker collapsed, blood pooling beneath his still form. The second warrior remained frozen, hands raised higher. "Where is Magnus?" Cain demanded. "Fled toward the east wing when we pursued the girl," the man answered quickly, self-preservation overriding loyalty. Cain knocked him unconscious with the hilt of his sword, then turned to Lyra. "Can you make it to the king's chambers alone? I need to find Magnus before he escapes." "I can," she assured him. "But Cain, be careful. There's something wrong with him, something beyond normal treachery. When I confronted him, I sensed a darkness, like the shadows that surrounded Noah during his nightmares." Understanding darkened Cain's gaze. Possession, the oldest and darkest of the Veiled One's arts. It would explain much. He touched her cheek briefly, the gesture startlingly tender amid the violence. "Go. I'll find you when it's done." They parted at the next intersection, Cain moving silently toward the east wing, while Lyra continued toward the king's private chambers. She found them heavily guarded, royal soldiers stationed at every approach. They admitted her only after careful verification of her identity. Inside, she found Noah clinging to his father, Isolde explaining the situation in rapid, anxious phrases. King Alaric's face was a mask of contained fury as he listened. "Lyra!" Noah cried when he saw her, breaking free of his father to throw his arms around her waist. "I was afraid they hurt you." "I'm all right, Your Highness," she assured him, smoothing his hair. "Cain found me in time." The king approached, his usual regal composure strained by the revelation of betrayal. "Magnus, all this time." He shook his head in disbelief. "He was my most trusted advisor, present at Noah's birth, confidant to my father before me." "The perfect position from which to undermine your rule," Lyra pointed out, "to ensure the Pax remained divided, as he said was his goal." The king's jaw tightened. "When Cain brings him to justice, we will have answers. About my queen, about the attack on your pack, about all of it." But Cain returned alone, his expression grim. "Magnus is gone. He used some form of transportation magic, left this behind." He held out a small object, a carved stone tablet bearing the same corrupted symbol that had been on the amulet intended for Noah. "A calling stone," Alaric identified it. "Ancient magic, thought lost. It creates temporary pathways between distant locations, but requires immense power." "And preparation," Cain added. He anticipated discovery, had his escape planned, and the king took the stone, studying it with a mixture of disgust and grudging respect. "He played us masterfully, serving as my right hand while systematically undermining everything I've worked to build." "The prophecy," Lyra remembered suddenly. She withdrew the translation from within her clothing, handing it to the king. "This is what triggered today's events. Thaddeus and I discovered the complete text, hidden within an ordinary herbal manual." Alaric read it silently, his expression growing more intense with each line. When he finished, he looked up at her with new understanding. "Betrayed by trusted hand," he quoted. "Magnus, saved by divided heart." His gaze shifted to Cain. "That remains to be seen." Cain's face revealed nothing, but something flickered in his eyes at the king's words. "What happens now?" Lyra asked. "Now we prepare," the king said firmly. "Magnus has fled, but the Veiled Ones remain. With their agent in the palace exposed, they will move more directly. The attack in the mountain pass was merely a prelude." He turned to Cain. "Double the palace guard. Restrict access to the royal wing. I want a full accounting of everyone Magnus met with in the past month." To Lyra, he added, "Continue your studies with greater urgency. If the prophecy speaks true, you are central to whatever comes next. Your abilities must be honed, your knowledge expanded." "And the prince?" "Stays with you as much as possible," the king decided. "Your presence shields him from the shadow magic, and after today's events, I suspect he'll find comfort in your company." Indeed, Noah remained close to her side, his small hand clutching hers as though afraid she might disappear. The trust in his eyes humbled her, reinforced her determination to protect him, whatever the cost. As the day faded into evening, the palace settled into a state of heightened security. Guards patrolled every corridor, checking identities, questioning anyone whose business seemed uncertain. Lyra remained in the king's chambers with Noah, telling him stories of the north to distract him from the day's frightening events. When the prince finally drifted to sleep, exhausted by emotion, she found herself alone with Cain. The king had departed for an emergency council meeting, leaving his enforcer to guard his son. "You fought well today," Cain observed quietly. "Used your magic effectively, kept your head in crisis." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Fear is natural. Controlling it is what matters." He studied her face in the soft lamplight. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have revealed sooner." The solemnity in his tone made her heart quicken. "What is it?" Cain hesitated, seemingly gathering resolve. "The night your pack was attacked. I didn't just arrive afterward. I was tracking the hunters, had been for weeks. I knew they planned something, but not what or when exactly." He moved to the window, staring out at the night sky. "I was close. Close enough that I might have prevented it had I pushed harder, moved faster. Your pack's death has haunted me for 15 years. "It wasn't your fault," she said softly. "Perhaps not entirely, but I bear responsibility." He turned back to face her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "There's more. The reason I recognized your pendant so immediately. The reason I felt drawn to protect you from the first moment I saw you in that great hall." He reached beneath his tunic, withdrawing a pendant of his own, not identical to hers, but similar enough that the connection was undeniable. A crescent moon, though without the star her grandmother's contained. "My mother was Frost Moon," he said quietly. "She left her pack to mate with my father, a warrior from the Iron Mountain pack. Such unions were rare then, discouraged by both sides. I never knew her homeland, never met her family. She died when I was young, leaving me only this pendant and stories of her people's magic." The revelation struck Lyra with the force of physical blow. "You're part Frost Moon. You have the same blood. Diluted by generations, but yes, it's why I dedicated myself to tracking your pack's killers, why finding you alive feels like a second chance, a way to honor the heritage I never fully claimed." Understanding bloomed within her. His protectiveness, his personal investment in her safety, his patience in training her, all stemmed from this connection he had kept hidden. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "At first, I wasn't certain of your identity. Then I needed to be sure of your character, your intentions. And finally," he hesitated, "I feared you might see it as manipulation, might question everything that has happened since your arrival." "Divided heart," she murmured, recalling the prophecy. "Torn between duty to your king and connection to your mother's people." "Yes." The admission seemed to cost him something. "The prophecy speaks truth. My loyalty to Alaric is absolute, forged over centuries of service. Yet I cannot deny that finding you has awakened something I long buried, pride in my mother's heritage, hope for its revival." She moved closer to him, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. "Thank you for telling me." His eyes, amber in the lamplight, held hers. "There is a storm coming, Lyra. Magnus and the Veiled Ones will return in greater force. The prophecy speaks of battle, of truth burning away deception. Whatever happens, know that I stand with you, not just by royal command, but by choice, by blood." The weight of his words settled around her, not as burden, but as protection, as promise. For 15 years she had been alone, the last of her kind, carrying a legacy she barely understood. Now, unexpectedly, she had found connection, not just to her past, but to a possible future. In the sleeping prince's peaceful face, in the king's growing trust, in Cain's revealed heritage, she glimpsed what might be possible. Unity, where division had reigned, healing where wounds had festered, strength where weakness had been exploited. The Veiled Ones had failed today, but they would return. Magnus had escaped with his knowledge, his hatred, his dark purpose intact. The prophecy's fulfillment remained uncertain, its cost unknown. But for the first time since flame and shadow had stolen her childhood, Lyra felt ready to face whatever came next, not as a frightened orphan hiding from her past, but as the last heir of the Frost Moon Pack, embracing her legacy at last.